Fala pessoal, só para lembrar para vocês que o próximo Musicast vai ser em inglês. Por quê? Porque é com Brad Schoenfeld. Maneiro, né? Pois é, então lembra de ligar as legendas para você poder entender tudo que a gente conversou. Fechou? Não perca o próximo Musicast, Brad Schoenfeld, para você.
So between 2013 and 2018, you investigated in nutrition and hypertrophy, and mainly the impact of protein timing on hypertrophy. What was the key takeaways from your work in that area?
Yeah, that's, by the way, another thing that really was somewhat surprising because I grew up reading the book Nutrient Timing, the Ivy and Portman. It was a classic book, 2004, I think it was published. And there was, at that point, a lot of acute evidence on the quote-unquote anabolic window of opportunity. And some researchers, including that book, were saying that it was more important than the total amount of food that you're taking in. And I was impressionable at that time. I was not as good a researcher as I was, but a colleague of mine, really astute researcher, Alan Aragon, give a shout out to him. And he called my attention and said, yeah, you really need to take a better look at this literature, because I was publishing a book at the time talking about the anabolic window. And I sent it to him, and I did, and that led to I collaborated, I co-authored a paper with Alan, actually several, and started carrying out more original research where we really studied this topic. The bottom line is that while we can't say that there's no anabolic window, that there may be a very slight benefit to getting your protein within, let's say, 45 minutes to an hour training. If there is, it's a very small effect. It certainly, for the vast majority of the population, is not going to have a meaningful benefit. I will say this, that again, when we look at nuances, there did seem to be, when we looked at all the studies, there did seem to be a slight benefit, and we couldn't rule it out statistically. It didn't show quote unquote statistical significance. I still can't rule out the possibility there might be the side effect. So if I'm consulting with a bodybuilder, I would say, look, it's not, there's everything is cost benefit. It's not going to hurt you to get your protein immediately post-exercise, so go for it. In that case, you should be anal, because that small amount of difference between a small amount of muscle gain that you might or might not get could be the difference between winning and losing.
Is there something that you see in the social media that makes you think that those are not correct understandings about your studies on the nutrition timing?
Yeah, I think that the stuff I see on the internet with our studies is scary sometimes. Like because people look, one thing, Paolo, and I know you know as a physician, there's people want confirmation bias. They don't want to. So they when we publish a study that confirms their belief, what their preconceived notion is, people latch onto that and they'll take it and they'll even run with it in ways that we don't even discuss in the paper. They'll make it into something. And if it's the opposite, they'll find ways to trash the paper rather than, to me as a scientist, we're just about seeking the truth, finding what works and what doesn't. That's my aspiration in life as a researcher. And I don't put my personal beliefs. It has nothing to do whether if I can improve by finding out a better way to do something, why would I say, no, I don't want to be proven wrong, so I'm going to keep my preconceived notions. The idea should be, and certainly that's the whole purpose of research, is to try to push the field forward and to either confirm or refute what people think is true, and then hopefully have people say, hey, look, this is a better way. We thought this before, and now we have new evidence, so let's take this where it goes.
So more recently, I should say 2020, 2024, in the second edition of your book, Science and Development of Muscle Hypertrophy, you introduced new chapters on hypertrophy, measuring methods, and advanced training practice. What are the key updates and how do they reflect the latest advances in your field?
Well, as far as methods, there's not really, the methods are still fairly constant. So I don't think we have much new in that realm over the past dozen years or so. to a large extent. I think they're becoming more accessible. Things like extended field of view ultrasound, which allows us to do cross-sectional area, it's becoming more affordable in particular, so it gives greater accessibility to that. But I think certainly where we're seeing more is in the specialized techniques that you brought up. And this is an area that's been woefully understudied. So our group has been involved in several recent studies on this topic. But what I would say is that certain techniques such as supersets, we did a recent study on this, and I think there's been several since publication of the book, seem to show that it doesn't have negative effects, particularly the paired supersets where you're doing, let's say, a bicep curl immediately followed by a tricep press down or vice versa. There may be, there certainly doesn't seem to be a negative to it. And there may be a time, certainly it saves time. So there may be a beneficial use to it if you're looking for a time-efficient workout. It's not that it's going to improve your hypertrophy, but that it's going to allow you to get more accomplished in less time, which is a barrier to a lot of people. So I think that's an important factor. Similarly with drop sets, it seems to have, depending on, there's different ways to incorporate drop sets. And I think that's an area that needs more study. I'll give you a scoop, but one of my students, Tom Herman, just finished his master's thesis on the pre-exhaust method, which basically is a same muscle superset where you do a single joint exercise followed immediately by the multi-joint within the same muscle group. So let's say a leg extension immediately followed by a leg press or a squat. Saved time, but it actually had a slight negative effect on hypertrophy. So conceivably the volume load was less, and thus you're not getting, this is what we're speculating, maybe a driver. And again, it wasn't a big difference. It was a relatively slight difference in hypertrophy, but all the measured sites, we measured multiple muscle sites, they all showed a slight decrease, or when I say decrease, they didn't show a decrease, they showed a slight blunting or a slightly better results, I should say, for the traditional group that did not do the pre-exhaust. So I think that if you're a bodybuilder, that would not be a strategy, contrary to the belief that if you pre-exhaust the target muscle, you'll be able to fatigue it to the extent that it gets more involvement in the subsequent set. That was the old theory behind it, but that did not seem to be the case with our study.
So how are new technologies and assessment tools influencing research and practice in hypertrophy training today?
Yeah, so in research, we have a lot of tools at our disposal. I think ultrasound is such a terrific tool that we have to measure muscle thickness or muscle cross-sectional area now. And there's even new technologies that still are in development for measuring the volume of a muscle. So basically trying to get a sense as to the whole muscle, what the actual hypertrophy of the entire muscle would be.
MRIs, for example.
Well, MRI is extremely expensive. MRI is certainly the gold standard, but that becomes extremely expensive, and it's also somewhat of a pain because you generally can't do it in a research lab. You have to go into a medical center. They have to have a certain lining of the walls so that there's no issues. So you have to have special rooms for that. I mean, DEXA is becoming somewhat more accessible now, although DEXA has some issues. Number one, it's not measuring muscle, specifically muscle growth. It's measuring fat-free mass. Some people don't understand. So you're getting a water component, extracellular water, which may not be muscle. So if you get changes in water, that can influence your results. But the problem with that is that it really doesn't give good availability for field for people, let's say bodybuilders, who want to look at their progress over time. And I will say this, on an individual, so on a research level, these tools are really beneficial. Their utility is somewhat less when we're looking at it on an individual level. So, I mean, I've seen instances where DEXA or BIA, bioelectrical impedance, we can do the same individual like today and then next week and the week after, and you get you can get where we know they're not gaining 3% body fat, but there's just individual variance based, even if you're following the protocols. When you then do this on a group level, those things tend to wash out. So the variability, the standard error of the measure tends to, be self-replicating there, where it doesn't interfere. But so you can draw good inferences on a group level. But if you're trying to look at your progress over time, you really need to do multiple measures over a fairly long period of time to have confidence that you're not getting a flawed finding. I've seen people freak out, and it's like, oh my God, my BIA or my DEXA showed I gained 4% fat, and I've been eating the same, and it's like, it's an error. There's no way that happened.